Now we are back again at my favorite topic. I am absolutely the regulatory. I love regulatory. I get really excited when we start talking about laws and what regulators are doing about things. And this one is especially exciting. We have Rafael Reyneri from the FTC. He's going to be talking about social media advertising and dark patterns. Now, we know that the web is rife with dark patterns, and these patterns deceive and manipulate consumers and customers, exposing all of us to scams and frauds. But today we have someone who's going to talk to us about the initiatives that the FTC is taking to stop it. So I want to thank Rafael for coming with us today, talking about combating the use of dark patterns, the FTC's recent report on the topic, and what they think that social media and video streaming platforms need to be doing about it. Thank you so much, Rafael. Very excited to listen.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. So yeah, as Eileen mentioned, I am an attorney with the Federal Trade Commission, the Division of Advertising Practices. And here I have to give the standard disclaimer that, what I'll say today is my personal views and not necessarily the views of the commission or any individual commissioner. So in the Division of Advertising Practices, we focus on enforcing the laws, the nation's truth in advertising laws. And one large initiative that I personally am working on, and I'll be focusing my remarks on, will be these what are called 6B orders that the Commission issued in March to 8 social media and video streaming platforms to analyze their essentially their commercial advertising screening practices and how they vet and screen their advertising and advertisers that they publish on their platform. So I'll focus on that, why we undertook the study, what we hope to gain from it, what questions we're asking, all those kinds of things. And then at the end, I'll also talk on the report that Eileen referenced on dark patterns and some of the sort of bigger picture issues that we are looking at the FTC on dark patterns. So I don't know if you all can see the slide up the slide deck. Yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you. So excuse the long title. That's just the formal name that we gave that we have to give for the order. And these are the attorneys, myself included, that are working on the 6B order. So the 6B study is a unique sort of legal authority that the FTC has. 6B references the section of the statute the Federal Trade Act, Federal Trade Commission Act statute that sort of is our enabling statute, and it allows us to engage in sort of studies using what's called compulsory process. So we require the companies to produce non-public information and data to us, and it allows us to use it to do a study that's not for law enforcement purposes. So we don't bring the study with the goal of bringing enforcement action. Instead, it's the idea is to sort of better understand an issue that's going on that's kind of evading enforcement. And typically the commission authorizes staff to publish a report at the end of the process, sort of explaining what we found, what we learned, what we think industry is doing well, we think industry should be doing better. All that information has to be anonymized and aggregated, so we won't be sort of specifically referencing what this one company did this or that. It's more at an industry level. I think the most famous one that we do is probably the tobacco advertising 6B, where every year the commission puts out a report sort of explaining how the tobacco companies are advertising, how much they're spending, who they're targeting at, all that stuff. So just try to understand an industry practice. Next slide, please. So, why did we undertake this study? So, we think that these platforms and both the content of the orders and the all the questions we asked of the companies and the companies who received the orders are all public, and we'll go through it too. But you can also see it all on the website online. So the social media companies and the video streaming companies that we sort of targeting in the study, we think may provide unique opportunities for fraudulent marketers to reach consumers. And in fact, the FTC has what they call a data blog, right? So we had this great database of consumer complaints called Consumer Sentinel, and we have a regular blog series where we sort of analyze different interesting data topics from that database. And for a few years now, we've had published these blogs where are finding that advertising on social media. It's not just the content, but the actual advertising, the sort of that content for which the platforms are receiving money are actually a large source of scams and fraud for consumers. In fact, I think maybe even the largest now at this point. So in addition to what we've seen from our own sort of data analyses, we've also seen just an uptick in press reports and some different sort of academic pieces trying to understand and then sort of anecdotally describing this phenomenon of social media advertising being a large source of scams and fraud. But it's kind of hard to get a holistic picture and to really understand what's going on the inside. The press accounts, as I said, are typically anecdotal. Our data analysis is limited to those consumers that submit complaints to us, which we know is kind of the tip of the iceberg. It's not most consumers probably don't submit a complaint after they've been defrauded. So we were hoping to really try to understand this phenomenon and really get an inside look on what's going on. We can understand the prevalence of these incidents, of the prevalence of fraud and deception, and what the platforms are doing to combat it. The other piece of this, and that the first one's definitely the core. The other piece of this that we're also kind of looking at is kind of the blurring of commercial and non-commercial messages on social media, which we think can make it difficult for consumers to recognize advertising. So sometimes you'll hear this referred to as native advertising. So this is essentially an ad, commercial content that has been formatted or designed to look not like an ad, right? To look like sometimes called organic content, user generated content. So that blurring and that difficulty that consumers may have in understanding whether they're seeing advertising content or not is something that we are interested in. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, I think we skipped one. Sorry. Can we go to the scope of the order, number 3? Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, so what are we what are we looking at here? So the orders focus on how the platform scrutinize and limit advertising that may expose consumers to unlawful ads or frauds. So some of the ones that we're particularly focused on, and these are the ones that sort of have come up most often in both our consumer complaints that we've received and in the press accounts, are things like fraudulent healthcare products, financial scams, or fake and counterfeit goods. So again, these would be ads for these products and services that these platforms are publishing. So we're trying to understand, how the platforms vet and screen for this kind of advertising and limit that kind of advertising's reach, both on the front end and then also on the back end after they've published this kind of stuff. What are they doing to take it down? And then again, as I was saying, the native ad piece is sort of the means by which the platforms use to distinguish commercial advertising and other commercial messages from non-commercial content. So what design tools do they incorporate? Do they require advertisers or some people like influencers to use when distinguishing these sorts of things? And then the last piece I see that you see there is called paid commercial ads. So the study is only focused on commercial advertising for which the platforms receive payment to publish on their own platforms. So we're not looking, for example, on ads published on third-party sites. We're not looking at generally. We're not looking at user-generated content. What we really want to know here is, for that content that the platforms are getting paid for, right? This is their business. This is the core of their business. What are they doing to police that and to protect consumers from frauds and scams that originate from that content? Okay, could you please go to the next slide? So these are, as I mentioned, this is all public. These are the companies that received the 6B order and that are required to produce the information, respond to the produce the information requested and respond to the questions that we pose to them. So Meta, which is Facebook, and Instagram, because they're separate, they're sort of incorporated separately. YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, now Twitter X, Pinterest, and Twitch. So I think these are probably the largest, some of the largest social media and video streaming sites that probably come to mind when you say when we say those terms. But we also wanted to get kind of a range of platforms at different sizes and different kind of demographics that we think may be using these platforms. So hopefully we'll get a nice spectrum in terms of being able to get a view of the whole industry and see what different platforms are doing well, what different platforms are doing poorly. Different companies take different approaches to these issues, and so we're hoping to be able to, again, we can't ultimately report out specific names or what specific companies are doing, but hopefully in terms of lessons learned, we'll be able to kind of compare and contrast and see what's going on. And then the other big part of this is, and I'll get to this in a little bit, but we asked for a whole bunch of data, and so the idea is to really be able to aggregate all that data and really get a holistic picture of the industry and see what's going on as a whole. And then the calendar period is 2019 to 2023. That's what we're hoping to get. We've asked for sort of the data information to cover that whole period. It's an ongoing process where we are now and trying to get that stuff. Next slide, please. So I've touched on this a little bit, but these are kind of what we really are hoping to understand from this study. So number one, the biggest point that what we really want to drill down on is the scale, the prevalence, and the kinds of deceptive advertising on social media and video streaming platforms. So how much of it there is. Literally, we were asking for data about how many ads get removed, how many ads get flagged, things like that. And then also the kinds of data. So we've identified certain categories. I mentioned them up front, right? Financial scams, health frauds, things like that. And so we're trying to understand just how much advertising in those areas really goes on, and what other practices in terms of vetting ads there. We're also hoping to understand the consumer groups who are harmed by these kinds of advertising. So we've asked them to produce certain demographic data. We'll see, our ability to analyze that and report that out. But our hope is to really be able to drill down on who are the groups that are most affected by these practices. The ad revenues generated, right? So we obviously know that advertising is the core of these platforms as a business. So we're asking them to sort of produce to us their revenues generally, but also in terms of these areas that we think are more likely to be associated with fraud and deception. Then we ask a lot about the efficacy of the platform's advertising oversight. So we're hoping to get internal documents and data about how these companies are vetting the advertisers and advertising that they're accepting to publish on their platform. So both in terms of the internal policies and procedures that they have in place, how they develop those things, right? The thinking and went into developing and taking those positions, and then we also asked for a lot of data about how many ads are they taking down, how much money are they making off those ads, as I mentioned, to try to really how many advertisers are they kicking off their platform, to really understand both on the front end before the ads get published, what are the steps being taken, and then also on the back end, once understanding that no system's going to be perfect and everything's there will always be some ads that get through, what steps do they take once they've recognized that there's an issue here, what steps do they take to take this stuff down and to prevent the advertisers from continuing to publish on their platforms. Then we also, I mentioned the sort of the native advertising piece, so the consumer's recognition of commercial advertising and other advertising messages on the platforms. So, again, trying to understand, making sure that consumers are capable of knowing when they're being served an ad, because I think as all consumers, once to weigh something differently if it's an advertisement versus if it's just an organic, non-commercial message. So in order to be able to sort of be able to weigh that accordingly and analyze that and understand that, interpret it correctly, you have to know that it's an advertisement. And if it's sort of been deceptively formatted to disguise that, that can be a problem. And so we're trying to understand, what the platforms know and do on that topic, right? I think they spend a lot of time quite carefully honing their design tools and the design of their platforms, many for perfectly benign reasons. But we want to make sure that this issue is also being addressed, and so we want to understand what they're doing on that front. And then we also have to think about a few different sort of kind of emerging design issues and platform issues. For example, we asked about the use of sort of shopping ads, or shoppable ads, it's sometimes called. So these are sort of ads that facilitate purchases directly through the platform, rather than just being a banner ad that shunts you off to the advertiser's independent website. These are ads that if you click through them, the purchase can be done right through, say, Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And so that kind of frictionless commerce can facilitate, or again can create issues if there's not sufficient care being taken to prevent against fraud and deception. And so we're asking about, how are they developing those tools? What steps are they taking to make sure that bad actors can't take advantage of them? Things like that. And then lastly, trying to understand if there's any material differences between language and how they treat ads in different languages. And specifically here, just because of resources, we focus on the two most spoken languages in the United States, which is obviously English and then Spanish. So trying to understand, to make sure that all of those great tools that they have to combat against these fraudulent ads can be deployed against ads that are in different languages, because the platforms publish many ads in many different languages, and so making sure that those tools are equally effective, irrespective of the language of the ad. Next slide, please. Thank you. So so that's what we hope to get. How are we going to get there is we ask many questions. So these are what we call interrogatories. And so we request the company provide a written response describing different policies and practices. So here are some examples of different sort of written responses that we've asked them to provide. Descriptions of processes and procedures, how they classify their ads and their advertisers, and different metrics they use for ranking and classifying these systems. Where the ad review teams sit in the organization, and the relationship with the ad sales teams. So understanding that personnel matters a lot in these, and when it comes to these issues, kind of I've asked them to describe how they structure their compliance teams relative to their sales teams, and where those teams sit and the roles that they have, things like that. Then we request many documents from them. So these we hope to get are sort of kind of internal documents that will sort of kind of from a primary source perspective really shine a light on what's going on inside these companies. So guidance and training materials. What are they? The ad reviews teams, what are they getting in terms of training materials? Senior management level documents about policies and practices to address certain types of deceptive ads and frauds. So not just what is your policy, but what were the documents that went into the development of that policy, right? What was the memo that to the sort of senior level manager that prompted that decision, to really kind of understand the decision making that goes into this and the reasoning. So related to the examples, strategy and planning documents are in that vein. Research and studies is something we're really interested in. So just trying to understand, and this I think maybe more relates to that kind of native advertising, the sort of being able to distinguish between advertising and different kind of advertising. Sort of what studies, what do the companies know about how consumers interpret these ads, and what are they seeing? And then also audits and evaluation. Reports. So like, are there internal audits that are flagging these issues, for example, and what are they being told are not flagging these issues? And then the third piece of this, I think the kind of third pillar, is the data reporting. And so we've asked them to provide a whole bunch of different kinds of data on ad revenues, ad views, engagement rates, demographics. So again, this is really where we hope to kind of be able to as close to objectively as possible, really understand what's going on these platforms, who's seeing these ads, how are they making money off these ads, how many problematic ads are there, by looking at the internal data and getting a real view into the prevalence of this issue. So how many ads are being removed, how many advertisers are being suspended, things like that. These are all the kind of the data that we've asked for them to provide. Next slide, please. So that's it on the study. So the order was issued in March of this year. As I said, I'm personally working on this with my colleagues on the team that's working on this. We are in the process of gathering all that information that I just described, which is a long-term process, negotiating and working with all the various companies to get us the information we need, while imposing as small a burden as possible on them. So it's a long process. And then once we get it all in, we have to analyze it, and then hopefully we will, typically the commission will authorize us to write a staff report where we describe our findings and our recommendations and all that. So that's what we hopefully will be the end product of the study. And I don't have a sort of real sense in terms of timing, but it's because it's definitely an ongoing process. So that's the study, the 6B study on advertising. The other part that I want to talk about was the dark patterns report that Eileen mentioned. So this came out September of last year. It's on, I don't have the link in the slides, I apologize, but it's on the website. If you Google FTC dark patterns, it'll come right up. And it's a really comprehensive, I didn't work on it, but it's a really comprehensive report that analyzes what dark patterns are and what, from the FTC's perspective, companies, what's unlawful and what's not, and what companies should and shouldn't be doing. And I think the real kind of key takeaway is that dark patterns are, in our view, are sort of design practices that subvert consumer choice and cause harm. And this is typically seen in getting consumers to give up their data or to buy a product or sign up for a service that they wouldn't have otherwise done. I think we've seen this, and the report does a really good job of breaking this down, but the kind of the four most common tactics that we've really seen are kind of ads that mislead consumers or disguise that. So again, this is kind of native advertising. So kind of ads that are not designed to look like news articles, stuff like that. Design patterns that make it hard to cancel subscriptions or charges is a really common one, right? So where the cancel button is buried or hidden. Similarly, burying key terms or adding junk fees is another area where we see a lot of dark patterns. And then lastly, tricking consumers into sharing their data. So these aren't necessarily completely new phenomenon. It's almost more like these are old tricks that are being translated into the digital context. And so I thought one really nice example of this was the FTC's case against Epic, which is a video game maker. They make the Fortnite game, which is a really popular one. And this came out December of last year now. There's a lot to the case, but the dark pattern angle I thought was really interesting because it was just kind of a kind of clear classic form of tricking consumers into making purchases or being able to charge your account without consent. And so that kind of classic deception, right, where it has a real clear pocketbook harm, but being translated into like a video game context. And so it's like that seems like a nice, easy example of a dark pattern being used while fitting within our kind of classic enforcement lens of protecting consumers against unauthorized charges.
An outstanding presentation. Thank you, my friend. We actually had one come in from the audience on the underlying assumption about the obligations of social media platforms to underwrite, adjudicate. I mean, the 6B investigation that you're doing now is framing it up to understand what they've been doing, but is there an obligation for them to be protecting consumers and vetting the ads, vetting the merchants? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think it's a good question. So, obligation can, I think, mean a few different things. And here, I mentioned earlier that the 6B study is kind of a tool used for non-law enforcement purposes, where law enforcement maybe not be feasible for one reason or another. And I think here you have to mention the law called Section 230, which generally immunizes platforms like these social media companies, websites and platforms like these social media companies from third-party content. So, you know, if you're talking about obligation in the strict legal sense, I think you have a large hurdle in the form of Section 230. So, you know, which is why we think a 6B study is particularly important, sort of appropriate to kind of understand what these companies are doing nonetheless. I would argue certainly that irrespective of you know, the classical legal obligation, that they certainly have an obligation to their consumers. Their users are their consumers, or their customers, and they like any good business has an obligation to their customers to, you know, prevent harm if they want customers to stick around, if nothing else. So, you know, do they have a legal one? I think that's a complex question because in the face of Section 230. But I think, you know, setting that aside, any business has a duty to prevent harm to their customers, and it's also part of the reason why we're really focused on paid ads, right? Because you could, you know, in the context of user-generated content, I think this gets even more complicated. But here we really are focusing on ads, or, you know, for which the company has a contractual relationship, has a business relationship with the advertiser. You know, they're getting paid to run and publish these, and so I think that, in my view, all the more so they have a reason to make sure that it's not problematic or harming anybody.
Absolutely. And I shot you a soft one there on the complicated 230 to loop that in. There's been some interesting rulings though recently where the courts are being pretty emphatic about, we don't care what you call yourself. You are, without you are in the direct path between the consumer and the illicit actor. Therefore, you're in the line of fire from a liability perspective. So I think it's a very complicated question, an interesting one. When we kicked off the day earlier, I spoke about this idea, how amazing it would be if the customer or the victim and the criminal never met. And I think what the path that you're on is obviously in spirit of, let's make sure they don't meet.
Yeah, I think I like the way you put that. It just kind of boils it down, right, to the essence of how do you break the chain of fraud? Do you prevent the interactions from occurring in the first place? And, you know, look at this at the scale of these platforms. It's you know, you're neither going to get perfect on either end. You're not going to get everything coming through. You're not going to shut everything down. I think it's really a question of, you know, where are these companies drawing the line in terms of how, you know, how much vetting and how much scrutiny and how much care are they applying. And that's what we're really trying to analyze is, you know, where is the default? Where are they making the judgment calls? I don't know, are they doing it to accept more ads? Are they doing it to protect more consumers? You know, what can we do to help on that?
I think it's interesting in the three target areas that you've listed out, certainly in the health and safety of the consumer, in the healthcare and the financial scams piece. If counterfeit goods is, you know, it's been kind of thematic throughout our talks today, but the proliferation of counterfeit goods is so in everybody's ecosystem. But I think the damage caused by it is substantial, and the funding of terrorism, we're aware of it. But in the healthcare and the financial scams, this is generational wealth being siphoned off. It's a threat to democracy. We're seeing authoritarian regimes being toppled in favor of criminal enterprises that are operating in them. And in the healthcare space, substance abuse, efficacy claims, counterfeit medicine, the direct impact at a one-to-one is such that I think everybody who received one of these notices as part of your investigation, I'm sure is now evaluating some decisions they've made over time. But I think for everybody in the payments ecosystem, understanding our responsibility relating to how are our payments enablements being used and what policies do these people have when they use our rails? I think we should need to hold ourselves a little bit more accountable of, well, how do they do that? Maybe we should ask. It's interesting. Nobody likes to overcomplicate anything and certainly nobody likes to win the compliance race or lose it. So you got to tuck yourself somewhere in between.
Yeah,
so
right. That's right.
Yeah, it's a tough sell, but we're at time, my friend. You're doing an outstanding job. It's a giant effort. I can only imagine the volume of data that you have on your end. We wish you luck, and if anybody wants your contact details, I'm sure you're open to participating with them. Absolutely. And yeah, so let us know. And everyone who joined us, thank you so much, my friend. I hope you have a great afternoon. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.